Good morning. This is Lee Perry. I am the pirate therapist. I am your local therapist who likes to dress up like a pirate, likes to have fun, and likes to teach things to people to hopefully help them have an improved life, an improved perspective on life, just to be able to find a little more joy in life. Today's topic is actually on perspective, where we're going to discuss what is it and why do people have a tendency to want to rush to judgment. And so I hope you will stick around and watch this episode. Perspective is a rather powerful topic, in my opinion. I really enjoy talking about perspective. It's one of my favorite topics. I would like to start off by asking you if you have ever been in a situation. Now, for me personally, traffic is a great place for me to probably be more judgmental and more emotional in my responses than in other areas of my life. Have you ever been cut off in traffic? Have you ever just made an assumption about what's going on in the other person's head? This person's an idiot. What kind of ding dong is this? What is this person thinking? What are they doing? And we tend to assume quite often the worst. We assume that they're just being inconsiderate, if you will. We sometimes we think even worse, they're just being stupid. Have you ever thought that maybe they were late for work and they could lose their job? Or maybe they had an emergency they needed to get to. These are things that we don't usually stop and think about in the moment. But I would like you to perhaps take a look and realize that our first thoughts on a situation are not necessarily accurate. In fact, quite often they're not. And the more emotional those thoughts are, they more often tend to be less accurate. So why do humans make snap judgments? Why do we rush to judgment so often? Well, in one part, that is because it is a survival mechanism. It is something that we have developed from way back in the early days of man as a survival mechanism to help us to stay alive. We had to assess things quickly. We had to jump to action very fast. If we did not, we could die. But in today's world, that it's far less often a survival situation, but we still have a tendency to want to think that way. It leads to misunderstanding of people's actions. It leads us to judgment, to assuming oftentimes the worst in others. Take, for example, a coworker who looks distracted in a meeting. It's easy to look at them and assume that they're just being lazy. But maybe they have a sick child at home or a sick mother or spouse. Maybe they have too many things going on at one time and their mind is just divided. And while we all like to think we're good at multitasking, nobody is really good at multitasking. Some are better than others, but most of us are not that good at it. We need to stop and take a look at things instead of judging based on assumptions of what's going on in their head, since we really don't know, or what's going on in their life. We should just take some time and think about what could be going on that explains what's happening, rather than looking for some negative purpose to what they're doing. And what perspective brings is empathy. Empathy is stepping into someone's shoes, someone else's shoes, taking time to try and understand what they're going through. Empathy is the counterpoint to judgment. When we show others empathy, we often can develop compassion. As defined in an online dictionary, compassion is the desire to remove someone's pain. I like that definition. There's other definitions under that word as well, but I like that one the best. When we view people through empathy and compassion, we tend to be more patient and understanding. We take time and make better decisions. With perspective, we respond more wisely instead of reacting and making decisions based on emotion. Remembering we don't know the whole story is very important, because with perspective, we only get a little bit. We don't have everything in a story that's going on. A lot of times, even in our own story, what's going on with us, we can't explain everything because we don't see everything. Perspective is important. It's something that we are given. We are all given one perspective and just one. It's important that we take time to expand that. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But perspective is what we want because it helps remove the emotion out of a situation. It helps remove that judgment. So one of the things we can do to find perspective is ask yourself, what's going on here? What else could explain what's happening? It's important for us to know that we should try and gain as much perspective as we can, because with perspective, we make better decisions, better choices. And oftentimes, even if we don't know if it's better or not, we assume more positive motivations for people's behavior. And that's okay. I would rather that we spend time, if we're wrong, I would rather that we spend more time assuming the best in someone rather than assuming the worst, which leads to judgment, which leads to conflict, altercations. It leads to situations between people that diminishes relationships. And we don't want to do that. One of the things that I would like you to understand is about radical acceptance. Radical acceptance, what is it? It is understanding that we cannot control anything that happens to us, but we can control how we respond to it. Our actions, our choices, that's where we have control. That's where our power begins and ends. What we don't have control over is what somebody else does to us or around us or what they do that affects us. Radical acceptance is understanding that my power and control it lies in my ability to control how I respond to situations. One of the things we should do is to seek context. Sometimes a small piece of background can change the whole picture. If we just get one piece of information that we were missing, if we improve our perspective just a little bit, that might change everything in how we view a situation that's happening to us. One of the things we can do if we're in a situation where we can actually talk to the other person is use reflective listening. Reflective listening is where we will repeat back to the person speaking to us what we think the message is that they're saying. We will take what they said and in our own words, repeat it back to them saying, is this what you're trying to say? And they can verify that that is what they're trying to say, or they can clarify, making sure that my understanding is more complete. It's a very good technique used in communication to make sure that misunderstandings are less frequent. Another skill or another thing we can do in this situation is flipping the script. Imagine if the same action came from you, how would you want others to interpret it? If you're late for work, if you could lose your job, if you're flying down the road, do you want people assuming that you're just an idiot? Or would you rather people assume that there's a good reason for you to be in such a rush? When we're communicating, we want to listen first. In conversations, don't go right to assumption. Instead, take a mode of thinking more in tune with curiosity. Try and improve your perspective by asking questions, by understanding more. So I was teaching once, and there was a lot of participants in this class, and we were talking about perspective. And so what I had them do was I had everybody stand in a circle with myself in the middle. And I had everybody take their phones out, and I had them on the count of 3, everybody take your picture. 1, 2, 3, click. Everybody took my picture. And now I said, okay, now look at your picture. Now look at the picture on the camera of the person on either side of you. And it's going to be pretty similar. It's going to be very close to the same thing. But the more you got away from you in that circle, the more different that picture was going to be. So tell me, if that picture is different, who's wrong? Who's the one whose picture is wrong in that situation? Well, nobody's picture is wrong. They're all accurate, but they have a different perspective. They have a different view on the subject, which in this case was me. But even though we're all given one perspective, there's more to it. Everybody around that circle was seeing something different. Sometimes it was very similar to one person's, and sometimes it was very different. But everybody's going to be seeing something different based on their picture in this case. And what we want to do is we want to look at other people's pictures to get a more complete understanding of the situation, or in this case, me. We want to, if you take the time to go look at other people's perspectives, you get a more complete understanding of the subject as a whole. And that's what we want, because we're all only given one perspective. And there's always way more to any situation than one perspective. What I would like is to share a story with you and kind of go over perspective a little bit. Samantha worked in a small marketing office. Every Monday morning, the team met at 9 a.m. sharp. Every Monday, without fail, Daniel, her colleague, strolled in late, sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes 20. He'd slide into a chair, mumble an apology, and start flipping through his notes. To Samantha, this looked very careless. She thought, here we all are, respecting each other's time, and he can't even make an effort to show up on time once a week. Her frustration built week after week. Makes sense. She started treating Daniel coldly. She avoided the small talk. She rolled her eyes in meetings, even complained to another colleague. Daniel just doesn't take his job seriously. But here's what she didn't know. Daniel was a single dad. His daughter had severe asthma, and every Monday morning he had to drive her across town to a specialist to an appointment before she went to school. He never told the team because he didn't want pity and he didn't want people looking at him and making excuses. Excuse me. He hated the idea of using his daughter's health as an excuse. Anyway, one morning, Samantha's boss pulled her aside and quietly explained Daniel's situation after noticing that her tension between her and him was growing. In that moment, Samantha felt two things. She felt shame and she felt clarity. Shame for how harshly she had judged without context. Clarity that her interpretation of his lateness said more about her assumptions than it did about his character. The consequences were real. For Daniel, he felt increasingly isolated at work, sensing the cold shoulders but never wanting to explain why. For Samantha, she had built that resentment that only made her own work days heavier. She just assumed the worst, and she got into this negative mindset, and it really would bring down her day. When she finally approached Daniel to apologize, she said, I made assumptions about you, and I was wrong. I'm sorry. Daniel gave a small smile and replied, thanks. Mondays are tough, but I'm doing my best. Okay. So the tension eased, but the lesson stayed with Samantha. She realized how quickly a judgment can erode relationships and how perspective can restore them. Remember, we never know everything in a situation. The more we look for different perspectives to any situation, the better we understand it. But it's possible we'll never understand everything in any situation, but we can certainly make an effort to understand more. This story highlights both sides, both of Samantha, who was the one quick to judge, and she carried unnecessary anger, and it strained the relationship. Daniel, he was feeling more and more isolated, and because of the complaining and backbiting, it made him feel more alone, more negative towards himself, and less part of the team. So just by Samantha making those rush to judgment assumptions, she was creating a negative atmosphere at work. Now, I'm not saying that we need to harangue on Samantha in this situation, because I think a lot of us tend to do this, and it's not out of any desire to be negative or any attempt to bring down anybody else. But I think we tend to naturally think more negatively, and that's something that we can work on as a person to do better at and assume more positive instead of negative. We want to be understanding, compassionate, empathetic. We want to be able to look at someone and help them and lift them up as opposed to tear them down, which also brings ourselves down. What strikes me about this story is how much energy we waste when we judge too quickly. Samantha had spent weeks building up resentment while Daniel carried the quiet weight of being misunderstood. And the truth is, neither of them gained anything from that. When we judge without perspective, we shrink people down to the one thing that we see in that moment. He's careless. She's lazy. They don't care. But behind every action, there's a story we may not know yet. Sometimes that story changes everything. The lessons here isn't that we should excuse bad behavior, but we should pause before labeling it. A simple question like, what else could be going on here? Can an open doorway to compassion? Can it save us from creating conflict? Can we, through empathy and compassion, make a situation better and avoid conflict? When there doesn't need to be conflict, there doesn't need to be negative assumptions. Anyway, this week, when you're feeling yourself judging quickly, I ask you to take a breath and ask yourself, what perspective am I missing? What a piece of this situation am I not understanding? You may discover that the very thing that frustrated you at first is also the thing that makes you or makes someone human, just like you. Again, if we flip the script, we want someone to look at us and use some compassion. We want them to understand that, yes, I'm being a little crazy right now, but there's a reason for it. We don't want someone looking at us going, you're being a little crazy, and just making that assumption and stopping there, saying that I'm broken or I need to be fixed or whatever. It's important that we take the time to flip the script, understand as much perspective as we can, but flip the script so we can have a bit more patience when looking at other people. We want we want to be patient with others because that helps us feel better about ourselves as well. I want you to try and tie back how perspective builds stronger relationships. If you can take the time to show empathy and compassion and connect with someone, understand what's going on with them, it will build that relationship between you and that person. Not always possible, but when possible, we should try. It will create less stress for you. It will improve your positive thinking and your kindness. I would like you to ask yourself, what does perspective mean to you in everyday life? Again, every situation we go into, perspective is important. We want perspective in any given situation, whether that's work, whether that's with family, with a significant other. We want to be able to have a better understanding, because the more we understand, the better decisions we make, the wiser we become, and the more people enjoy being around us. There's a quote, and I've tried to find the source of the quote, but I cannot remember. As I recall, it was attributed to 3 different people. I believe it was Abraham Lincoln, Benjamin Franklin, and one other person. Anyway, I don't know who originated it, but from the gist of it, I think they're all dead. So hopefully this doesn't blow back on me for not attributing it properly. The quote goes thusly: "It is better to keep your mouth shut and have people think you're stupid than to open your mouth and remove all doubt." It is better for us to take a moment rather than reacting, rather than speaking our mind at first blush, and try and understand, try and get more perspective before we open our mouth and commit to anything. We will look a lot smarter. We will sound much wiser because you will find that you will put your foot in your mouth far less frequently. So how do you remind yourself to pause before jumping to conclusions about people or situations? I think you should ask yourself, what happens if a situation occurs and I don't like it? Rather than judging it, if you just stop long enough to ask yourself, what could explain this? What could be the explanation for this situation happening, even though I don't like it? Is there an explanation that would explain it in a non-threatening, non-negative way? Is it possible that something is going on with somebody else that I don't know and I don't understand? If I make that assumption, it's easier for me not to hold that stress in. It's easier for me to let go. I think it's important. We don't want to build our own stress. And when we make those presumptions, we have a tendency to have much more stress in our life, build all of that negative thinking and stress, and it just piles in, and it makes us more irritable and difficult to get along with other people. People start avoiding us and they don't want to be around us. I don't know about you, but we all want friends. We all want people to enjoy our company, to enjoy being around us. So do you think in your work, asking yourself, what could explain this behavior that I don't like in a way that is not negative? Is there something going on with that person that could explain this that does not lead back to malfeasance or stupidity? If you understand more about the whole picture, if you get a greater perspective and it helps you see a situation differently, doesn't that make you wiser? Doesn't that mean you stress less often? I think it does. So why do you think we are so quick to judge? I kind of went over that already. It's because survival wise, we will have to make a quick decision. But that's not the case anymore. It's not about survival, not most of the time. I hope it's not. That would be awful if you're constantly looking at true survival situations. But give the other person some compassion, some empathy, and try and understand a greater perspective as to what's going on with them. This will help both of you. Have your kids, and they may not be your kids, they may be nieces, nephews, they may be grandkids, but have your kids ever taught you something that you did not see, something helped you see something that improved your perspective, which changed the way you were thinking? Fun fact, anyone, no matter how old they are or young, can teach you something if you have an open mind and you are willing to learn. Anybody can teach you if you are open to that teaching. Let me ask you this. Do you think social media makes it harder or easier to practice perspective before judgment? Now, I want you to take a look at that, and I want you to look at the social media. I want you to look at the news. What is it about those that draws you, that pulls you in? They encourage your emotional thinking. They encourage the lack of perspective. They want to give you perspective. Well, They want to give you their opinion. They don't want to give you perspective. They want to tell you what to think. They want it to be emotional because we feel a strong connection when we react emotionally. What they don't teach you is how to pause, how to think, how to use empathy, how to use compassion. They don't teach you typically how to be considerate of others. Instead, especially if we look at the political world, everything is about you're this or you're wrong. Not just wrong, you're stupid, you're awful, you're a terrible person, you're a horrible human if you don't think the way I think. That is not perspective. That is the opposite of perspective. They want to tell you what to think, and it happens all the time. Here's an interesting question for you about social media. Have you ever seen anyone's mind changed? I'm sure we've all seen the arguments trying to change each other's mind on social media, but have you ever seen anyone actually change their mind based on an argument on social media? I can't say that I have. I don't know if I've ever seen that. Just something to think about. So, what do you think one tool or habit that you could use to step back to find better perspective in a tense situation? What's a tool or a habit you could create, a skill, if you will, that would help you to look for more perspective, to help reduce tension in any given situation? Some of it is asking these questions, and I think it would be a good habit for all of us to get into, to ask ourselves, what could explain this? What positive way of looking this, maybe not positive, but what could be happening with this other person that would explain that behavior that does not take it to that negative place where my emotions wanted to immediately go? We don't want to go to harsh judgments. We don't want to assume the worst in people, because when we do, it often will reflect in our own lives and we become more bitter, more negative, and that makes us more unhappy. If you could give one piece of advice to someone struggling with being judgmental, what would it be? I'm not going to answer that one. I want you to think about that. What's a recent moment when perspective changed the way you handled something? Can you think of a time in your life where you had rushed to judgment and then you learned something about that situation that maybe changed your mind, that maybe said, look, I need to step back. I need to pause and realize that it wasn't the way I thought. Did it make things worse? When you gained that perspective, were you able to recover? Were you able to pull it back together and resolve the situation and perhaps heal some of what damage was made when you made that judgment? How has practicing perspective made your relationships? When you take the time to understand what's going on with the other person. When I see parents working with kids, I hope I see it a lot. I think I see it a lot. But parents will take the time to sit down with their child and say, okay, what's going on? You seem very upset. And they try and increase their perspective, but they're also trying to teach their child. And they're not only improving their own perspective, but they're also teaching the child to look for perspective, to try and search themselves and see what's going on. This is not a bad skill. This is a good thing for us to practice, and it's a good thing to teach our kids. And our kids learn best through example. So how about improving your relationships, whether it's at work, whether it's with friends, your spouse, your significant other, your children, any of these? When you find that perspective, when you look for that perspective, when you try and use empathy and compassion, can you think of examples where that's made those relationships stronger? Think about that. Build on that and see if you can't continue to do that more and more frequently, improving the relationships all throughout your life. This is our episode for today. I want to thank you for tuning in again. If you have found anything beneficial from this, I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe, maybe share it with some friends, share it with people you think might benefit from this. Please take the time to consider if this has helped you, and if it might help someone you know. I'm not doing this to get paid. I'm not doing this for any benefit other than it helps me in my mind to do something that might help other people. And that's why I'm doing this. So thank you. I appreciate you all. I will once again bid you adieu, and I will talk to you next week. So for now, have a wonderful week, and I will talk to you next week. Goodbye.